Hi everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we are going to run through every single book that I read over the summer, and I would say what I'm considering summer is anywhere from the beginning of June to the end of August. So everything I read in between there. According to my journal, over the summer I read 14 books and then 3 volumes of manga. I'm not sure how many of those were audiobooks. There were some that I did both for, but that's what we're working with. So what I want to do is start in June, and we'll go in chronological order all the way to the end of August. So the book that we're going to start off with is actually a YA book, and I was surprised how much I liked this, but also I wish I had read it when I was younger because I think it would have packed more of an emotional punch. But that book is none other than Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Now, I ended up giving this book about a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't quite perfection, which is what I reserve my 5 stars for, but this book has so many fantastic themes in it, and for as long as it is, I read it so quickly. So who we're following in this book is our main character Frances, and I believe that this takes place in the UK. It's not America for sure, but Frances is finishing up high school, and she's kind of grappling with this idea of what comes next. So she's trying to figure out where her place is in the world. One of the other major themes of the story is that she draws fan art for this podcast called University that she really, really loves, and she forms a friendship through this. We follow the 2 characters, which I think the other guy's name is Alid. He's the one who actually is behind the podcast. But Alid and Frances are navigating their friendship and how they want to proceed after high school too. There's a lot of talk about, is university the best thing to go into, or what kind of options are actually out there. And I think the conversation is really interesting, especially if you're 17 or 18. I think this book would be perfect for you. I also just really like how realistic the friendship is in this. You could tell that these 2 were best friends, and I liked that it was a friendship that was not romantically involved whatsoever. I liked the platonic friendship representation, and the power of fandom was also really, really great in this. And just the idea of being a creative and putting your stuff out there into the world for people to either love, critique, hate, anything, really. Just power of creativity. You choose what you want to do with your life. This is a great read for teenagers. Okay, the second book that I read in June is a romance book from one of my favorite author duos, which is Christina Lauren, and I read The Paradise Problem. So this book I read while I was traveling and on vacation. Perfect read, super easy to go through on my Kindle. Really enjoyed it for the most part. I was never bored, but it's one of those stories that didn't land with me. So I would say I gave it about a 3-star, 3.5 star. We follow our main character, who I think her name is Anna. So we follow Anna, and she has this friend slash ex-roommate that she's trying to fake date in order to show his family that he's got a wife. I don't know, wacky concept, but if you love fake dating, destination stuff, and intense family drama, I think you would really like this book. But it's not my favorite from Christina Lauren's catalog. So the next thing that I've read in June was One Piece Volume 24. Like most people, after the live action One Piece came out, I wanted to know what all the hype was about. So I started watching the anime originally, and oh my god, it is insufferable at the beginning because it's so drags everything out, whatever. So my friend's like, oh, just read it instead. So I've been doing that, and I've kind of put it down for a little bit now. It's not a forever put down, but I'm on the Skypiea arc, if that means anything to viewers out there. But I would like to pick this up eventually, but right now I'm just kind of not feeling totally compelled to jump back into it. So we'll see. Next, we're going to go over all of the books that I read in July, and we're going to start with probably my favorite book that I've read this year so far, and that is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This book is a ride. It's great. We follow 2 characters, one, Pamela, and the second character is Ruth, as they're navigating this serial killer that's affecting both of them in the 1970s. And so it takes place where in Florida, at the sorority, which is the sorority that Pamela is president of, a couple of girls are injured and killed in their sorority house when a man breaks in. And it's basically implied throughout the story that the killer is Ted Bundy, but they never say his name. He's always the defendant, which I really like how this story focuses on the women rather than on the man who's so smart and is doing all of these things. But this story is an exploration of women's voices and how often we're not believed for things, and it also shows like the incompetencies of the law enforcement sometimes. So that was always really interesting to read about, but also incredibly frustrating. This book was my favorite of the year. It's fast-paced, easy to read, very thought-provoking, and I think that all women should read this. Obviously, I gave this book 5 stars. And I only have the paperback version because this is actually the ARC, so I own the ARC copy because I got it way back when and took way too long to read it, but I am so glad I did. Please read this book. Okay, next on the list, I got to One Piece Volume 25, which, you know, it's just about the same feeling as I had about 24. Nothing too much to report there. So another fact about me is that I love reading nonfiction books that deal with psychology or sociology. So I've read a few of those this summer, but the one that I read in July was Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And this book, so interesting. And it's really heartbreaking that this seems to be such a common thing, but I liked how the author didn't make it sound preachy at all, but just gave helpful strategies for people who might need it. It's a really interesting read if you're, you know, intrigued by psychology. I think it's one of the best ones out there, and I gave it 5 stars. Next on the list was a book series, a duology that I finished on audiobook. So I finished the Letter of Encampment series with Ruthless Vows, which is the second book. And I did not love this one as much as Divine Rivals. I loved Divine Rivals. I really enjoy the rivals to lovers writing letters to each other kind of feeling, and oh my goodness, they were so cute in the first book with their banter. But this book, while it deals more with the fantasy elements of things, I feel like a lot of the character work wasn't as compelling as in the first book because we got to focus on the central relationship a lot more. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but they're not together as much in the second book, which is fine. It's just something that I would go back and read the first book, but maybe not the second book. So the second book lands at about a 3.5 stars for me. Next on the list is one I got opinions about. So I read a short story collection, which is called Her Bodies and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, and I did not like this book very much. There are probably 2 stories in here that I really liked, which was The Husband Stitch and 8 Bites. Both of those were really great, succinct, could follow what was going on, loved it. Did not love the over 50 pages, it was almost 100 pages, of SVU recap? Why? It brought nothing new to the story. It was, I don't know how this almost won an award because of that section being so long. And Machado's writing is really good, but sometimes it blurs the line of too weird to understand rather than weird and able to follow, if you know what I mean. There were some interesting concepts in this, but the stories didn't really tie together, which they don't necessarily have to for a short story collection, but I just felt as if the themes were all over the place, as well as the pacing and writing. So I would like to read something else by Carmen Maria Machado. Maybe I'll read In the Dream House, which is her memoir. But overall, this book is probably a 2 stars for me. Still recommend that you check out her writing, though, because she is talented. Next, we'll jump into everything I read in August, and August was one of my best reading months this year so far. Very proud of myself. I read a lot physically, too, which made me happy, because I do try to sit down and actually take time to do that, because I have to make the time, but this month I kind of crushed it, so I'm gonna pat myself on the back for that. First book that I read, which was poor timing after I finished Her Body and Other Parties, it was another 2-star, and this was A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. And I'm so sad that he didn't didn't like this one because the whole setup of it is that it's this girl who's absolutely obsessed with a romance book series. Like, it does the sequel thing where you follow a different character throughout. There was like a little town, and then she actually is going on like a road trip, and she gets lost in that town. So she's basically transported into the pages of the novel. But where things get complicated is the author of the books actually just passed away and never finished the last book. So there was a lot of like loose ends that were never tied up. And she being the main character, was always curious how things ended, but didn't know because nothing was released after. She goes to this town and she sees all the characters she's come to love, and she meets a guy who is not a character, so she's trying to place how his role is affected in the story. Then my main qualms with this book was I didn't see the chemistry between the two main characters. Like, Anders was just not an interesting guy. There wasn't really anything to him other than he was grumpy and he had minty green eyes and smelled like black tea. If I had a nickel for every single time that those two phrases were used, I wouldn't have much, but I'd still probably have $1. Like, it was just over and over. I didn't know anything about like his personality, what makes him tick. All I knew is that he had minty green eyes. And after a while, you're just like, okay, it wasn't enough to keep my attention. Next up on the list is actually a book club book that I read for my company. My company sometimes does like nonfiction book club books, so I joined in for this month, and that was The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. This book is great. It's really, really well written, has good points, has like a lot of research that's been done on it, and you can tell. What this book is talking about is why Gen Z, which is my generation, is extremely anxious, and what are the factors of society that have caused them to be this way. It dives into not only like childhood past, but the upcoming or upbringing with social media, and it's really interesting. I think the most interesting part of the whole book is Haidt talks about cell phones in schools and how that's impacted children's learning and how that will continue to impact if we don't do something about it. There's a lot of nuance to this book. Really enjoyed it. Should probably give it a read if you're considering putting a tablet in your child's hands before a certain age. I think it was really, really insightful, and hopefully it's optimistic for the future. But I gave this book 4 stars. Next up on the list is actually a reread, and I listened to this on audio, but I own a physical copy, and that's A Darker Shade of Magic by B.E. Schwab. I originally read this back when I was in high school, and now that I'm a bit older, I wanted to reread it to remember what's going on so I can finish the series since I own all the books and haven't gotten to them yet. So in this book, there are 4 different Londons. There's Red London, White London, Black London, and Grey London. And our main character, Kel, can jump between the different Londons, but magic is not something that everyone can use in the same way he does because he's an Antari. He's got, like, much more magical power flowing through him. So we have Kel, and then our other main character is Lila Bard, who is a female thief, and she has a chance meeting with Kel where she steals an important artifact from them, and the story goes from there. And the two have to work together, even though they have very conflicting personalities, to save their respective homes. What I really, really loved about this book is Holland and Kel's dynamic. Holland is another Antari, and he and Kel are very different in the way that they approach things, and Holland's a great character. Kel is the star of the show for me. I gave this book 4 stars, though, just because I felt like some things were rushed in this novel, as well as Lila is not my favorite character to follow, and with a lot of it being from her perspective, I was like, she's just okay in my mind. But I still really enjoyed my reread, gave it 4 stars. I'm really excited about this next one. The next book that I read was Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Malors, and originally I gave this book like 4.5 stars. I still think about it. I think it's a 5-star read. I love literary fiction books with messy characters. This book is an exploration of like friendship dynamics and like relationship dynamics, and I ate it up. I loved every second of it. Coco Malors is a new favorite author of mine. Her writing is so real, and she talks about the human condition in such a way that I was captivated. What happens in this book is we're following 2 people. We're following Cleo and Frank. the Cleopatra and Frankenstein, if you will. And they like rush into a marriage of convenience. Like Cleo says it's because she's in love with Frank, but it's mostly because she needs a green card to stay in the US because she's originally from Britain. So there's that, and there's also a huge age gap between the two. And the story just talks about like their relationship problems, how their friends affect their relationship, and what happens with living in New York City being incredibly messy and flawed people. This story is incredible. I highly recommend that you read it, and I'm also so excited for Coco Malore's new release coming out in September, which is Blue Sisters. So, 5 stars, loved it, probably in my top 3 that I've read this year so far. Next up on the list is a chunky fantasy book, and honestly, not many people on the internet have been talking about this book, which shocks me a little bit, but I also understand why people don't as much. The book in question is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miram. And I listened to this on audio and read the physical book, but I needed something to listen to while I was painting this bookshelf, and I saw that Ordinary Monsters was available, so I was like, sure, why not? I was immediately sucked in. Immediately sucked in for like the first third of the book. I thought it was so good. I was like, why don't people talk about this more? I really liked how this book had a slower start too. Like, I felt we got to know Alice as a character, Marlowe as a character, Charlie as a character. The characters drive this plot, which I think is why I like it. I also am such a sucker for a setup where it's like children with magical powers and they're all different, and we also have a setting that's well before like advanced technology. I just really love that. This specific series takes place in like the 1800s and like Victorian London style era, and we follow what are called talents, and they're these children that have like magical powers and they're kind of outcasts, so they send out like I'm gonna say recruiters, but they send out people to bring the children to the safe place, which is known as Candale. It's very X-Men-esque, and I also, while I was reading it, was getting the feeling that it was like the Diviners, which is a huge compliment because that is my favorite series of all time. This book has had so much potential. There's like what's called like the Orsine, which is like between life and death, and all of like the magical powers come from life and death and like manipulating dust, and it's so interesting. The magic in it is so interesting. But I felt like this book could have been edited down just a bit more, because I felt like towards the end it was like whiplash of what the heck is going on, thought we were already here. But I did already order the second book from my library to give it a try, because I think this has a lot of potential to go somewhere, but I just felt like it kind of lost it in the last half for me. So I'm sticking with like a 3.5 stars currently, but like the first bit of it was close to like a 4.5 for me. Next for August, I read this book when I was very sick. I got like knocked out for a week in August with like a sinus infection, so all I did was lay and read, and it was great. This book, another Christina Lauren, is Tangled Up in You, and it's a retelling of Tangled, Disney's Tangled. I enjoyed this so much. It's part of the Meant to Be romance series, which has a bunch of different like romance authors writing like these one-off stories based on Disney princesses. And I've read If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy and By the Book by Jasmine Guillory, I think that's her name. I tried to read the third one, which is like Kiss the Girl, and I could not get into it. Maybe I'll try it again because I really enjoyed this one. It was just a fun read. It centers a road trip. If you know the story of Tangled, you probably would know the story of this. But the characters were fun. The writing was like quirky in a way where I was like, oh, because it's endearing, because it's Rapunzel, you know? One thing that I will say about this book is, like, obviously one of Rapunzel's big character traits is her naivete, but sometimes it came off as a little annoying in this book because, so she was raised on like this homestead where she knows nothing about technology, nothing about the outside world, and the story takes place in modern day, so it almost feels a little far-fetched. I don't know. It was just that aspect of it, you had to suspend your disbelief just a little bit, but if you suspend your disbelief, it's gonna be a very fun time. I gave this book about 4 stars. Doing a complete 180 from a cute, fun, fluffy romance, I read something that emotionally scarred me, and that was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julie Armfield. I actually read this for a new book club that I joined, which is called the Sapphic Book Club. So we read books that primarily focus a female-female romance. This book follows two women, and obviously they're married. One is named Leah and the other is named Miri, and it follows Leah's expedition going down into the ocean in a submarine with two other people. Something happens and the submarine gets stuck down there in complete darkness. And it's kind of a story following Miri's grief after Leah doesn't return for a while and she learns to live without her, but then Leah comes back. And they're trying to navigate their relationship from there. This book is what I would describe as atmospheric horror, where there's not like a lot of like horrific things actually happening, but just the tone of it makes you like step back just a little bit. All of the descriptions about like teeth and things in the ocean are like spine chilling. There's a few things that happen where you're like, oh, like gut punch. It's a very emotional book. Very interesting depictions of grief and like complacency even, because what do you do if you get stuck in a situation like that? There's nothing you can do. Where do you go from there? We had a fantastic book club discussion about this, and actually discussing with people made me appreciate the book more. I originally gave it like a 3-star read. I was kind of like, but now I think it's like a 3.25, 3.5 stars. I still think that this is really good book though, and would recommend if you like atmospheric horror, then this is the right book for you. Before we get into the last book, I just want to shout out the last manga that I read, and that was My Hero Academia Volume 37, which is towards the tail end of the series. Like I think I only have like 4 or 5 more volumes to read, but the last season of My Hero is coming out and I need to know what happens because I don't know how it ends. We follow our main character Izuku Midoriya, and it's his story of becoming a hero. He goes to this hero academy, learns how to control the powers that he's given, and we follow his story. I suggest watching the show if you have it. It's really a great time. Even though the later seasons aren't like my absolute favorite, there's something so much fun about the first 4 seasons that really have a place in my heart and a place on my shelf. So yeah, My Hero Academia. And the final book that I read in the month of August is An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. I'm very proud of myself. I put this on my list of 24 books to read in 2024, and I got to cross it off. I've had this on my shelf for at least 3 years, and I was like, it's finally time to read it. So I did. Following 2 perspectives in this book, we're following Laya and Elias, and they're both on opposite ends of the political spectrum. So Laya's brother actually gets like captured by the Empire for being a traitor, and she wants to save him and make sure that he doesn't die. So she basically sells herself into slavery in order to like gain more information and build a like spy relationship for the resistance so that they'll help save her brother. So she is on the lower end of things, and then Elias is actually a military-trained soldier of the Empire, but he's not really sure that he wants to continue down the path that he's going. He kind of wants to desert, and he's not sure like what the next steps would really be because of his family's expectations. Follow how these two meet and how their actions impact the world around them. This book is actually a lot heavier than I thought it was going to be, but Saba Tahir writes in a way where it's not glorifying anything. It's like real. And I really appreciated her character work in this. Helene is one of my favorite characters now. She knows how to write a complex human being. Like, I'm just so excited because this ended on a really great note and set up perfectly for the next book. Like, I know that like books 2 and 3 are going to be really, really strong in this series. But it's a really good starting fantasy book. Like, I felt as if there were some magical aspects, but there weren't a ton. And I'm excited to see what the exploration is going to look like in the 2nd and 3rd installments. And I've heard mixed reviews about the 4th book, but I'm still hopefully going to read the rest of this series then. But I really enjoyed this and gave it 4 stars. Alright, well, that's all the books that I read over the summer. Here's all the physical ones that I own. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and comment below what your favorite book was that you read this summer. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!